"I'm sorry, ma'am, but I can't let you board this plane. This area is reserved for executive personnel." It was a sentence she had heard before. In shopping malls. In luxury hotels. Even in her own office building by unfamiliar faces. But never here. Not here. Not on the very airline she built from scratch. She had arrived early, dressed comfortably, deliberately casual for the inspection. No fancy suits, no flashy jewelry. Just a simple black blouse, jeans, and flat shoes. She believed in blending in, seeing things as they truly were, unfiltered. But today blending in was a mistake. A mistake that would unravel everything. As she approached the VIP lounge, the tension was immediate. A young crew member blocked her path, eyes scanning her from head to toe with suspicion painted all over his face. His posture was rigid, his voice clipped. It was more than a denial. It was a dismissal. "Ma'am, I'll have to ask you to leave this area. It's restricted for executive personnel and invited guests only." She smiled politely, her voice calm. "I understand. I'm here for a scheduled inspection. Could you check the guest list? My name should be there." The crew member's eyes narrowed. No attempt to verify her claim. Just a dismissive shake of the head. "There's no need to check. You don't belong here." The insult was subtle, veiled in professionalism. She had faced it before. The polite sneer. The patronizing tone. The hollow smile that held no warmth. But before she could respond, two more crew members approached. "Security," called without a second thought. Their stances mirrored the first man's, rigid, defensive. Their eyes locked on her as if she were some kind of threat. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises. Now." Her chest tightened. She tried to explain, but the words fell on deaf ears. Their expressions were unreadable, eyes cold and focused. This wasn't confusion. This was judgment. The cameras were already rolling. Passengers watching from the corner of their eyes, recording, whispering. What happens when a powerful black woman is judged by her appearance rather than her accomplishments? What happens when the very empire she built turns against her because of the assumptions of those who were meant to serve? She reached into her purse, pulling out her credentials, documents proving her identity, her authority, the proof of her position. She handed them over, calm but firm. But the crew members didn't even glance at them. One of them snatched the papers, eyes darting between the pages with disinterest. "Nice try," he scoffed. "We get people like you trying to sneak into these areas all the time. It's not going to work. People like you." The words stung. Not because of their meaning but because of their arrogance. The assumption that her wealth, her power, her status could be dismissed by a uniform with misplaced authority. And then came the ultimate insult. The radio call. Security backup requested. Possible intruder at the executive lounge. Suspected trespasser refusing to leave. Trespasser. On her own airline. Suddenly the air was thick with tension. The whispers grew louder. The phones continued recording. Would this be her legacy? The woman who built an empire only to be brought down by ignorance? No, not today. But before she could utter a word, a senior officer arrived. His gaze cold and clinical. He looked her up and down, his assessment swift and dismissive. "Ma'am, if you don't leave voluntarily, we will have to escort you out. Do you understand?" Her hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "I am the CEO of this airline." Laughter. Not just from the crew members but from the officer himself. Amused. Unbelieving. As if she had uttered the punchline of some dark, twisted joke. "Sure you are," the officer chuckled. "And I'm the President of the United States. Let's go." The guard reached for her arm. And that's when everything changed. Because at that very moment, the cameras weren't just recording her humiliation. They were recording the truth. The truth of a woman who had built something extraordinary, only to have it torn down by ignorance and prejudice. The truth of an industry that preached inclusivity but failed to practice it. The truth of a world where power and success still weren't enough to shield her from judgment. The rage boiled within her. But not the kind of rage that lashes out. The kind that builds. The kind that plants. And in those few moments of disbelief, disrespect, and dismissal, something shifted within her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Because power is not just in titles or wealth. It's in the will to change what's broken. And she was just getting started. The woman at the center of this conflict was Janet Smith. A name that should have commanded respect, not suspicion. The founder and CEO of Velonix Air, a luxury airline company known for its uncompromising dedication to innovation, customer satisfaction, and inclusivity. She wasn't born into wealth. Far from it. Janet grew up in a working-class neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, and dreams were often dismissed as fantasies. Her mother was a schoolteacher, her father a mechanic. Hardworking people who instilled in her the values of integrity, resilience, and empathy. But Janet's ambitions were sky-high, and nothing was going to stop her. Her journey began with a single idea, a desire to revolutionize air travel by creating an airline that wasn't just accessible to the elite but embraced diversity at every level. An airline where everyone, regardless of their background, was treated with the same respect and dignity. She spent years pursuing her education, obtaining a degree in aerospace engineering, followed by an MBA in business management. She took on multiple jobs to fund her education. Nights spent studying, days spent working. She navigated spaces where she was often the only black woman in the room, constantly underestimated, doubted, ignored. But she never wavered. Velonix Air was born out of her frustration with a world that seemed unwilling to change. She launched the company with a commitment to diversity and inclusion, not just as a slogan but as a core principle embedded in its foundation. Hiring practices at Velonix Air were designed to provide equal opportunities. Her executive team was a mosaic of different races, genders, and backgrounds, a rarity in an industry dominated by uniformity. Velonix Air grew rapidly. Its fleet expanded. Its customer base swelled. Janet's reputation soared as a pioneer and trailblazer. She became a symbol of progress, a black woman who not only infiltrated a historically white-dominated industry but thrived within it. But even as she built her empire, the world around her remained resistant to change. Racial profiling isn't just a problem on the streets. It's embedded within boardrooms, executive offices, and luxury suites. It exists within the very systems that claim to promote equality. Implicit bias, a form of unconscious prejudice, continues to affect decisions and perceptions across all industries. Studies reveal that black professionals are often perceived as less competent or less suited for leadership roles, despite their qualifications and accomplishments. In Janet's case, the statistics were more than numbers. They were her reality. She had fought against these biases her entire life. Doubted by professors, overlooked for promotions, and dismissed by potential investors who couldn't imagine a black woman leading a major airline. But against all odds, Janet's resilience shattered those expectations. Velonix Air became a symbol of her triumph over adversity, a living testament to her refusal to be confined by societal limitations. But while Janet's success story was celebrated by many, it was resented by others. Jealous competitors. Corporate elites who felt threatened by her success. Those who believed that power should remain in the hands of the familiar, the traditional, the expected. It was within this climate of both admiration and resentment that the incident at the airport occurred. The pattern was undeniable. No matter how successful, wealthy, or influential a black person becomes, they are often seen through the same narrow lens of stereotype and suspicion. Janet was no exception. Her success had placed her on the same pedestal that so many before her had been torn down from. Not by lack of talent or vision, but by the prejudices of those who refused to see them for who they truly were. And Janet knew this. She had spent years preparing herself for the challenges that would come her way. The silent judgment. The condescending smiles. The subtle slights and overt dismissals. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened that day. Janet was not only a CEO. She was a public figure. A mentor to young black professionals. A woman who gave motivational speeches about overcoming adversity and achieving excellence. She had been interviewed by the most prestigious media outlets. She had her face on the covers of Forbes, Time, and Business Insider. She had built Velonix Air into a multi-billion-dollar enterprise with flights spanning continents. And yet, all it took was a few words from a crew member to reduce her to nothing more than an unwelcome stranger. Someone who didn't belong. The story of Janet Smith is not just the story of one woman's journey. It's the story of a world still struggling to accept that greatness comes in all colors. The dismissal she faced wasn't just an oversight. It was a deliberate act rooted in bias, reinforced by a society that has failed to dismantle the structures of racism and inequality. But what happened next? That's where the true story begins. Her name was Janet Smith. A name that echoed through boardrooms, corporate conferences, and aviation conventions across the world. The black woman who built Velonix Air into a global phenomenon. Janet was a woman of refined elegance and undeniable presence. She carried herself with the kind of confidence that only came from surviving battles most couldn't imagine. At 44 years old, she had achieved what most could only dream of. Velonix Air, a company she started with nothing but her vision and relentless determination, now stood as a multi-billion-dollar empire. She was tall, her skin a rich, smooth shade of brown that glowed under the natural sunlight pouring through the glass walls of the executive terminal. Her hair, styled in neat, natural curls, framed her face with effortless beauty. Janet wore a simple black blouse, fitted dark jeans and flats, an intentional decision to keep herself approachable as she planned to surprise her staff with new benefits and bonuses. She believed in being hands-on and staying connected to her employees. That's why she insisted on conducting regular inspections of her airline services personally and unannounced. Today was supposed to be one of those days. A routine check turned surprise appreciation visit. But what was meant to be a day of celebration would soon spiral into something far more sinister. As she stepped through the polished glass doors of Velonix Air's exclusive private terminal, her eyes scanned the room. Flight attendants in tailored uniforms bustled about, preparing for their upcoming flights. Pilots reviewed charts and weather forecasts. Everything seemed normal. Janet smiled, nodding politely to the employees who acknowledged her with respectful greetings. Most of them were accustomed to her visits and looked forward to them. Janet's presence always meant something good was coming. She approached the VIP lounge, her fingers clutching a folder filled with contracts and announcements meant to enhance employee welfare. Today was about giving back. It was about celebrating her staff's hard work and dedication. But as she neared the lounge, something changed. The mood. The energy. The way eyes shifted towards her, then quickly away as if trying to pretend they hadn't seen her at all. She slowed her pace, confusion etched on her face. She was used to admiration, yes. Respect, certainly. But this was different. This was caution. Suspicion. As Janet reached the entrance to the lounge, a young man in his early 20s stepped forward. His uniform was crisp, his demeanor tense. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice sharp and mechanical. "I'm going to have to ask you to step back. This area is restricted to executive personnel and invited guests only." Janet's smile remained, but it was now tinged with confusion. "I am executive personnel. I'm here for an inspection. My name should be on the guest list." The young man's eyes narrowed, skepticism carved into his features. He didn't check a list. Didn't even glance at the digital tablet resting on the podium beside him. "I'm sorry, but I can't let you through. You need to leave." For a moment, Janet said nothing. The calmness of her tone was not an indication of submission. It was restraint. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," she said, her voice steady. "Please check the list. My name is Janet Smith. I'm the CEO of Velonix Air." A hint of amusement flickered across the man's face. "Sure you are." And then, without another word, he gestured for security. Janet watched as two security guards approached her, their expressions unreadable but their stances aggressive. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave the premises immediately," said one of the guards, his voice laced with authority and impatience. Janet's brow furrowed. "I've told you. I am the CEO of this company. Check the guest list. Call your supervisor. This is a misunderstanding." But the guards weren't listening. They didn't care about her words or the composure with which she spoke them. They had already made up their minds. "This is your last warning, ma'am. Leave now or we will have to escort you out." The crowd was gathering now. Passengers, crew members, onlookers who had been minding their own business but were now drawn to the unfolding drama. Phones were out. Cameras were rolling. The whispers had already begun. Who was this woman arguing with the staff? Who did she think she was? And then came the laughter. Dismissive, mocking. Not from the onlookers but from the crew members themselves. A woman in uniform smirked, her voice dripping with condescension. "You must be lost, lady. This isn't the passenger lounge. This is for staff and executives only." Janet's hands trembled slightly. Not from fear. From rage. She reached into her purse, pulling out her identification documents, her CEO credentials, her business cards. Everything she had built, all reduced to a piece of paper in her hands. "Here," she said, her voice still calm but straining. "This proves who I am. Now will you please check the list?" The guards exchanged a glance before one of them took the documents from her, barely glancing at them before shoving them back into her hands. "Nice try. But we get people like you trying to sneak into these areas all the time. You need to leave. Now. People like you." The phrase hit her harder than she expected. It wasn't just disrespect. It was dismissal. It was racial profiling wrapped in a veneer of professionalism. She looked around at the faces staring back at her. Some were curious, others sympathetic, but most were indifferent, as if watching a spectacle that had nothing to do with them. And then came the radio call. "Security backup requested." Possible intruder at the executive lounge. Suspected trespasser refusing to leave. Trespasser. On her own airline. Janet's chest tightened. The room felt smaller. The walls closer. This wasn't just an insult. This was an attack on her dignity, her authority, her identity. But even as her rage built, she knew this was only the beginning. Because the more she tried to reason with them, the more they seemed to push back. This wasn't about protocol. This was about power. And Janet Smith was about to show them what real power looked like. Janet stood in the middle of the executive lounge, surrounded by hostile stares, dismissive smirks, and indifferent glances. Her own airline's terminal, a place that was supposed to reflect her values of inclusion and excellence, now felt like a hostile battleground. The guards were on their radios, speaking in hushed tones that carried a weight of authority. A code was uttered, something Janet didn't recognize but knew well enough to understand. They were calling for backup. Possible intruder. Refusing to cooperate. Refusing to cooperate. As if she was some kind of criminal. As if her very presence was a threat. The whispers continued. Passengers on their phones, some snapping photos, others recording video. The digital age ensuring that her humiliation would not only be witnessed but documented. Spread. Amplified. It was no longer a simple misunderstanding. It was an escalation of prejudice and arrogance, of power wielded with reckless disregard. And she felt it. The familiar, sinking feeling of being judged not for who she was but for what she looked like. The same feeling she had experienced all her life. Memories she had tried to bury but now surfaced with painful clarity. In college, she was once accused of plagiarism because her professor couldn't believe a black woman could produce such brilliant work. During her early career, she was mistaken for an assistant or receptionist during meetings, even when she was the keynote speaker. Investors doubting her credibility, assuming she couldn't handle the demands of running a business. Police stops where she was questioned not because of her actions but because of her appearance. Janet had spent years fighting against the barriers placed before her. Not just breaking them down but building something entirely new out of their shattered remains. Velonix Air was meant to be her legacy. But at that moment she felt it slipping away. The backup had arrived. 3 more security guards, their faces blank and emotionless. They flanked her, cutting off any escape. "Ma'am," one of them began, his voice devoid of empathy. "You're causing a disturbance. We've received multiple complaints from staff and passengers. We're going to have to escort you out." "Escort me out?" Janet's voice was strained, holding back the frustration threatening to break through. "I am Janet Smith, CEO of this airline. And I am here for a scheduled inspection." The guard didn't flinch. Didn't even acknowledge her words. "Identification," he demanded, holding out his hand. Janet handed over her credentials, her heart pounding as the guard examined them. He stared at the documents for a few seconds, then handed them back without a single nod of recognition. "These could be forged," he said dismissively. "We've had people try this before." Another guard chimed in, his voice sharp and cutting. "Ma'am, you need to leave. Now." The words were starting to blend together. They weren't speaking to her as a person. They were speaking to her as a problem to be removed. "Check your guest list," Janet insisted. "You'll see my name. Janet Smith. It's right there." The first guard shook his head. "You're not on the list. You're trespassing. And if you don't leave voluntarily, we will have to escort you out, by force if necessary." It was as if her words were nothing but static to them. The truth she was presenting, the power she held, meant nothing. This wasn't just ignorance. It was deliberate dismissal. Janet looked around, her eyes catching the faces of the onlookers. Some of them looked sympathetic, others disgusted. But most were indifferent. They were watching a spectacle. A performance. And she was the unwelcome actress thrust onto their stage. More memories surged forward. More reminders of how racism had intertwined with every stage of her life. The boardroom meetings where her ideas were dismissed until a white man repeated them. The time she was followed by security at a luxury boutique, despite being the wealthiest person in the room. The news articles that questioned her competence rather than praised her achievements. It was a cycle. One that never seemed to end. And now it was happening again. In her own company. The tension was reaching a boiling point. Janet could feel her pulse throbbing in her temples. The humiliation, the anger, the disbelief, it was all building, pushing her towards an edge she had tried to avoid. One of the guards reached for her arm. The touch was light but the intent was clear. She was being removed. Physically if necessary. "Ma'am, this is your last warning." She pulled her arm away, her voice steady but fierce. "Don't touch me." The guard hesitated, but his authority remained unshaken. You're refusing to leave. That's grounds for detainment. Detainment? Janet's voice broke through the air like a whip. For what? For standing in a place I built? For trying to do my job? The guard's gaze was cold. We don't care who you think you are. You're trespassing. And you're causing a disturbance. The crowd was growing. Passengers, employees, journalists who happened to be passing through. The spectacle was becoming a story. And the cameras were everywhere. Phones raised, fingers tapping, video streaming. Her humiliation was being recorded, replayed, dissected. But Janet's eyes were burning now. The rage she had kept buried was rising to the surface. No more tolerance. No more restraint. The cameras weren't just documenting her shame. They were documenting the truth. The truth about racism and power, about bias and authority, about how even the most successful black person could be reduced to nothing with a single word. Trespasser. But Janet Smith was not a trespasser. She was a pioneer. A leader. A woman who refused to be silenced. And they were about to find out exactly what that meant. Janet stood there, her back straight, her eyes sharp. The guards had surrounded her, the staff continued their mockery and dismissal, and the passengers remained captivated by the spectacle unfolding before them. But there was something different about Janet now. Her demeanor had shifted from disbelief to pure, focused fury. She held her phone tightly, her fingers steady as she dialed a number. The crowd watched her every move, curiosity mixed with disdain. Janet pressed the phone to her ear, her voice calm and steady. Get me Director Olivia Ramirez. Now. Pause. The guards exchanged confused glances. They hadn't expected her to fight back. They expected her to shrink. To apologize. To leave. But Janet Smith had never been one to bow down. Within minutes, a woman appeared, striding through the chaos with authority and purpose. Director Olivia Ramirez, the head of airport security. A woman known for her no-nonsense approach and dedication to maintaining order. Her sharp features were set in a frown as she assessed the scene, her eyes immediately finding Janet in the middle of the room, flanked by guards. What is going on here? Olivia demanded, her voice carrying the weight of authority. One of the guards stepped forward, eager to explain. Ma'am, we have a trespasser. She's refusing to leave the executive lounge despite multiple warnings. Olivia's gaze narrowed. Trespasser? Yes, ma'am. She claims to be the CEO of Velonix Air, but we all know that's impossible. Olivia's expression remained unreadable. She turned her gaze to Janet, her eyes searching for the truth. Is that so? Olivia asked, her voice measured. Janet nodded. It is. And I have the credentials to prove it. But they refuse to check the list. Refuse to acknowledge my documents. Refuse to even listen. The crowd had grown larger, the whispers escalating into murmurs of disbelief and intrigue. Olivia glanced at the guards, then back at Janet. Let me see your credentials. Janet handed them over, her movements deliberate and calm. Olivia studied the documents, her expression unchanging. Then her eyes widened ever so slightly. This is legitimate. Olivia's voice was firm, but there was a hint of shock behind it. It's more than legitimate, Janet replied, her voice now commanding, filled with the power she had earned through years of struggle and success. I am Janet Smith, CEO of Velonix Air. And I demand an explanation for this treatment. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. The guards stiffened, their faces pale. The crew members who had mocked her seconds ago were now shrinking back, their eyes wide with horror. But Janet wasn't done. She took a step forward, her voice rising, resonating throughout the terminal. You dismissed me. You humiliated me. You called me a trespasser in my own company. And why? Because I didn't fit your assumptions of what a CEO should look like. The crowd was silent now, hanging on her every word. You judged me based on nothing but your own prejudices. You treated me with contempt and arrogance. And now the world is watching. Janet gestured to the phone still recording, to the camera still capturing every word. Your ignorance, your bias, your disrespect. It's all being documented. And it's time you learned that power does not belong to those who hold the loudest voices or the most aggressive postures. Power belongs to those who refuse to be silenced. One of the guards stammered, his voice shaking. I didn't know. I'm sorry, ma'am. We were just following protocol. Protocol? Janet's voice was laced with contempt. Your protocol is rooted in prejudice. And I will not allow it to stand. The tension was palpable. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. Janet's gaze shifted to Olivia, who had been watching the entire confrontation with a mixture of shock and understanding. Director Ramirez, Janet said, her voice like steel. I want the names of every individual involved in this incident. I want their employment records, their performance reviews, their complaints, everything. Olivia nodded, her voice firm. Yes, ma'am. Right away. Janet turned her gaze back to the guards, to the crew members who had laughed and dismissed her. You're all fired, she announced, her words cutting through the air like a blade. Every single one of you. Effective immediately. The reactions were immediate. Outrage. Pleading. The arrogance that had once filled their voices was now replaced by panic and desperation. Please, ma'am, I didn't mean, one of the crew members began, but Janet silenced him with a single, fierce glance. You didn't mean to do what? Disrespect me? Humiliate me? Disregard my authority because of your own biases? Janet shook her head. You meant exactly what you did. And now you will face the consequences. Olivia stepped forward, her voice strong and clear. Everyone involved in this incident will be escorted off the premises. Now. The guards who had once surrounded Janet with hostility were now ushering their former colleagues out of the lounge. Faces pale. Eyes downcast. Pleas falling on deaf ears. But Janet's gaze never wavered. Her fury remained controlled and precise. She turned to Olivia. I want a full report of this incident on my desk by tomorrow morning. And from now on, every employee of Velonix Air will undergo mandatory diversity and anti-discrimination training. Effective immediately. Olivia nodded. Understood. The crowd was dispersing now, the spectacle over but the impact lingering. Janet's words had resonated, not just with those present but with the countless others who would see the footage online. But Janet's work was far from done. This incident was more than an embarrassment. It was a wake-up call. A reminder that the battle against racism and bias was never truly over. And Janet Smith would not rest until every corner of her company reflected the values she had fought so hard to build. But as she turned to leave, the murmurs began again. This time they weren't of scorn or dismissal. They were of admiration and respect. Janet Smith had made her stand. And the world was watching. Janet Smith returned to her office that night, her mind still buzzing with the events of the day. What was meant to be a routine inspection had turned into a confrontation that exposed deep-rooted biases within her own company. She sat at her desk, her fingers gliding over the mahogany surface she had spent years earning. Behind her, the city skyline stretched out in all directions, a testament to her achievements and the progress she had fought for. But tonight those accomplishments felt hollow. Not because of her own failures, but because of a system that continued to resist change. Janet's thoughts drifted back to the countless times she had been undermined, dismissed, and questioned because of her race. The moments when she had been introduced as the assistant, even after stating her title. The interviews where reporters seemed more interested in her being a black CEO than a successful one. The investors who treated her ideas as charity cases rather than brilliant business concepts. Every insult, every slight, every act of prejudice had been a lesson. And she had channeled those lessons into the creation of Velonix Air, a company meant to break down barriers, not reinforce them. But today's incident had proven something she couldn't ignore. Bias had infiltrated her company, hidden beneath uniforms and protocols. And if it existed at Velonix Air, it was likely embedded within every corporation, every institution, every system designed to maintain the status quo. This was not just her battle. It was everyone's. The following morning, Janet stood at the podium in front of a packed press conference. Reporters from all major news outlets filled the room, their cameras focused on the woman who had become the center of a global conversation. Behind her, the Velonix Air logo shone bright, a symbol of her journey, her success, and now her resolve. Janet adjusted the microphone, her eyes calm and unwavering. Yesterday, an incident occurred within my own company that demonstrated the very problem I have dedicated my life to fighting. Racism. Bias. Prejudice. It's not enough to build a company that promotes diversity and inclusion on paper. Those values must be lived, practiced, and enforced by everyone within the organization. Her words were measured, powerful. The room was silent, every reporter hanging on her every syllable. What I experienced yesterday was not just an act of disrespect. It was a reflection of a much larger issue. One that affects millions of people every single day. People who are judged, dismissed, and targeted because of their appearance, their background, their identity. Janet's voice grew stronger, her conviction undeniable. I built Velonix Air to be a company that celebrates diversity, that breaks down barriers, that creates opportunities for those who have been shut out of rooms they should have been welcomed into. But yesterday my own company failed me. It failed itself. And it failed the principles I founded it on. She took a deep breath, her gaze sweeping across the audience. But failure is not the end. It is a chance to do better, to be better. I am implementing several new policies effective immediately. Mandatory diversity and anti-discrimination training. Every employee of Velonix Air, from the entry-level staff to the highest executives, will undergo comprehensive training on implicit bias, racism, and inclusivity. This training will not be optional. It will be continuous, ongoing, and held to the highest standards. Zero tolerance policy. Any act of racial profiling, prejudice, or discrimination will result in immediate termination. I will not tolerate such behavior within this company. Not now. Not ever. Inclusive hiring practices. We will continue to broaden our efforts to hire a diverse workforce and ensure that people of all backgrounds have equal opportunities for advancement and recognition. Transparency and accountability. Every complaint of discrimination will be documented, investigated, and addressed with full transparency. The results will be made available to the public, ensuring accountability at every level. Community outreach. Velonix Air will fund initiatives designed to combat racism and promote social justice, partnering with advocacy groups, schools, and community leaders to build a more equitable future. Janet's eyes shone with determination. This was not just about restoring her company's reputation. It was about creating real change. The press conference went viral. News outlets across the world reported on Janet's powerful speech and decisive actions. The footage from the previous day's confrontation had already circulated online, sparking outrage and support in equal measure. Some praised her for her strength. Others criticized her decision to fire the entire crew. But one thing was undeniable: Janet Smith had made her voice heard. Within days, other companies began implementing similar policies, inspired by Janet's unwavering stance. Social media campaigns emerged, demanding accountability from corporations that had long ignored the issues of racism and bias. Janet's inbox was flooded with messages. Some from supporters, others from critics, but most from ordinary people sharing their own experiences of prejudice and injustice. And Janet read every single one. Months later, Janet sat in her office, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The changes she had made. The battles she had fought. The battles she would continue to fight. She knew this wasn't the end. Racism was not something that could be dismantled overnight. It was a constant struggle, a fight that required vigilance, dedication, and courage. But Janet Smith was ready. Because true power was not just in building an empire. It was in using that power to make a difference. And Janet Smith would never stop fighting. Not until the world recognized the truth: greatness comes in all colors. What happened to Janet Smith was not just her story. It's a reflection of a reality faced by countless individuals across the globe. Racism, prejudice, bias. These are not just words. They are barriers that continue to hold people back. Barriers that must be dismantled. This story was meant to do more than just entertain. It was meant to inspire, to awaken, to call for action. If you believe in the message of equality, justice, and change, we need you to be part of this movement. Ask yourself, what would you have done if you were Janet Smith? Would you have stayed silent? Would you have walked away? Or would you have stood your ground and demanded the respect you deserve? It's time to start conversations. To challenge prejudice. To hold institutions accountable. Your voice matters. Your actions matter. Here's how you can make a difference. Speak up. Share your own experiences. Challenge racist behavior when you see it. Make your voice heard. Support organizations fighting for change. Donate to or volunteer with groups that are working to dismantle racism and promote equality. Hold companies accountable. Demand that businesses implement genuine diversity and anti-discrimination policies. Join the conversation. Comment below. Share your thoughts. Share your stories. Share what you believe needs to change. If this video moved you, if it inspired you to act, then make sure you subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge injustice and promote equality. Like this video. Share it with everyone you know. Let's make sure the world hears Janet's story. And remember, greatness comes in all colors. Thank you for watching.